Welcome to ANN In Depth. This week, we had probably one of the most special conversations we've had in a long time. We talked about the Sabbath and what Sabbath means to us. And we had with us Ruth Hodge, who is, she's writes for us all the time. In fact, if you've been on our Instagram page, and if you haven't, I really would recommend you do that this week. And you've read all of our posts about Sabbath and the beauty of the Sabbath and what Sabbath means. Ruth is behind all of those. She's written them. And Sam, wasn't this one of the, it was just some weeks are exciting, some weeks are inspiring. This was just a really beautiful conversation and personal conversation about what the Sabbath means to us.
Yeah, Ruth shared some pretty deep stuff about her family, about what it means, what the Sabbath means to her, and what it should mean to others. And we talked about the shift in understanding of the Sabbath over the last few years, as new generations are less interested in convincing others about the Sabbath and more interested in inspiring others with the beauty that is the Sabbath. So if somebody is interested in Sabbath keeping, in practicing Sabbath, in knowing what the biblical Sabbath is all about, they're going to love this conversation.
Yeah. And I think either way, when you have these types of personal conversations about something that all three of us are so passionate about, you're bound to be moved. And so we really hope that you're as blessed by this conversation as we were. So enjoy. God bless. Hi, welcome to ANN In Depth. We're so happy to have Ruth with us. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me.
Ruth is a friend of ours. She works with us on Adventist, our writing for Adventist.org and social media projects. And actually, Sam, I think we've come to rely pretty heavily on Ruth. If she ever decided she didn't want to work with us, we'd have to close up shop.
Close.
Pretty close. So no pressure, Ruth. You're with us for life. And we are here to talk about the Sabbath. And Ruth, the Sabbath is something that you are very passionately about. You think deeply about it. You think through things. You talk about it. It's something that you love. Like since we've met, that you and I have sort of bonded over, and that you love. What is it about the Sabbath that you love so much, or the topic of the Sabbath that has just really transformed you?
I think it continues to transform me every single Sabbath. It's just like a deepening awareness of just how much I haven't done myself and how much God has done. And how I know it's on the seventh day of the week, but it's kind of like the first full day of human existence that God was like, you've done nothing, let's rest, let's spend time together. And so for me, it is that central reminder that God is actually all powerful and he's the one that's orchestrating and bringing beauty and meaning into my life, not myself. And that's something that I had to surrender daily, but in a big way a few years ago.
Yeah, it's funny because Sam, we talk about this a lot, like that Sabbath is an act of faith that God will provide for you. And what I would like to ask both of you, I would love to hear both of your answers to this, is how has because as a team, a communication team within the Seventh-day Adventist Church over the past year, we've definitely gone through an exploration of the Sabbath. Not that we've suddenly decided to keep it as a group, but that we've decided to really study it further and to talk about it more externally, and to really remind our members that this is what makes us sort of stand out and special, because there have been more conversations around us within the Christian community. And as we've been going through these explorations, I've wondered how, and I'd love to hear both of you talk about, how has Sabbath changed for you and the way you view it from when you maybe first started keeping the Sabbath on your own, apart from your families, and where you are now? How has your Sabbath journey changed?
Well,
If you want to start, because Sam, either one.
You can start.
I grew up in a very conservative household, so Sabbath was something that was kept really precious. Don't touch it; it's holy. Friday, let's get the house tidied up. Let's get cooking so that we don't have to cook on Sabbath, and so on. And one of my most memorable Sabbaths, for all the wrong reasons, I was 8 years old, and before then I had been told that my parents did not want to buy me a bicycle because they didn't have the money to buy the bicycle. And I really wanted a bicycle. The real reason is that they thought I would kill myself in a bicycle, which was not far from the truth. So I really wanted this bike, and it had to be one of those BMX bikes, you know, for tricks and stuff. And I thought, well, if they don't have the money, I think I can make the money. So I looked at some friends of mine who were selling ice cream at the beach. And I thought lollipops and so on, not lollipops, ice lollies. And I thought, this is it. I grew up in Brazil, and this was an island. And I grew up by many different beaches. And we lived like 300 meters from the beach. So I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I got my little money. I bought the container that would hold it, and I bought the ice cream. And I went selling after school many different days of the week. And I loved it because, you know, you could make little money every day. And my friend said, just wait until Saturday comes. You're going to make a lot of money. It's going to be great. I was 8 years old, and I decided I was going to try and sell it on Sabbath too. Now, I knew, you know, this story is not going to end well, right? So it really doesn't. So I find myself, you know, after church, after lunch, my mom is giving Bible studies. My father is asleep, and I go to the beach. I go to the place where I buy the ice cream and the ice lollies and so on. And I go to the beach. I sell it. Within half an hour, the whole thing is gone. And I come back very happy. I'm going to go again. But I didn't want to take the long route. So I took the short route, which crossed right in front of my house. And sure enough, as I'm walking in front of my house as quickly as possible, I looked, and my mom sees me with the container going back to get some more. And she doesn't say anything. When I come home, she says, where's the money? Okay, so I give her money. This money was made breaking the commandments, and therefore it is not blessed. We're going to burn it. And then my dad comes back and says, what? This is a crime. You know, you cannot do this. He was a colonel in the military. And he's like, I'm not going to break the law. And she says, but my dad knew better. My mom just goes, this is not your business. I'm dealing with this. So my dad just storms out, and I'm left alone, defenseless. And she says, I'm going to wait until I can calm down. And when she was calm, she said, go and get cut the guava tree, a stick, take the leaves off and bring it back. And I was very familiar with that ritual. And so getting the stick hurt more than the actual pain of getting disciplined and watching the money burn. And that she did it. She
did. I was like, did she do it?
She did burn
you got whipped. Oh
I just watched the whole money burn over there. And that really solidified a lesson for me, which I've never forgotten. Your value does not come from how much money you make. That was it. It's deeply embedded within me that it doesn't matter how much stuff I have or how much money I have or anyone has. The Sabbath is a reminder that nothing is more important than your relationship with God, and your value comes from being created and redeemed by God. The money does not define you. So that was my upbringing, you know, in this. And it was there was no flexibility, if you will. The Sabbath was holy, don't touch it. And as a child, it can be annoying, but later you realize how grounding this is, how important it is for your sense of self as you navigate a world that is constantly trying to convince you that unless you have this product, unless you have this degree, unless you have this thing, then you're not enough. The Sabbath is a reminder that you are enough, and you're reminded of this every week, and it's priceless.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. It's really interesting you make that point of value. I think so. I grew up. My parents had just been baptized themselves when my mum was pregnant with me, and so they came into the Adventist church. They were nominal Church of England or Anglican, and around about the age of 6, my mum actually left the church and left my father, and I watched him continue just in complete faith of God. It was very easy for him just to be like, oh, the Bible says it, I'll do it. And he was just like straight with it. But we grew up, I mean, all sorts of things with inconsistent to the Adventist community and culture. But a lot of the young people around us really didn't keep Sabbath um, in what I would deem or perceive in those days as a conservative or biblical way. And so there was a lot of tension. And my mum would kind of like have a go about that. And I think it was, I left the church when I was 16. Um, and I guess from like an outside point of view, but when I was growing up, we observed Sabbath on my dad's side um, pretty normally. Um, but it was when I came back that I actually saw the impact that not observing or valuing the Sabbath has, because I was watching my mum still kind of spiteful towards her Adventist church experience and to the family and things like that, really working in her own strength with a business, and striving for some sense of value and importance. She was a pilot. She flew float planes, had her own business, was an instructor, so she taught others. And just as you've mentioned, Sam, the best day to earn money in this field is generally on a Saturday. People are generally traveling back to where they're coming from on a Sunday, but Saturday is like go day. And so I would just notice her when I came back, rather than feeling like, oh, like I can't wait for like 7:15 p.m. when I can, switch the television on and it's not VeggieTales, and it's not, Hope Channel or something. It's I don't know, Lilo and Stitch or something like that. I now had this attitude of just wanting to extend the Sabbath and extend it in experience with her, and watching her refuse to take part in it because she was so wound up in that sense of her worth, coming from what she had achieved as a woman in aviation, the first float plane operator in Australia, all sorts of things that she just claimed to be important for her. But I also saw her struggle every Saturday to find somebody to fly with her, and to support her business, because you require 2 or 3 people, and also that waking up in the morning and she's going off to that and I'm going off to fellowship and enjoy faith community, and just that tension. And it was a beautiful thing for me to recognize the importance of Sabbath and what God was saying to me about my worth. But it was so sad at the same time to watch somebody not understand that their worth comes solely from God, and that they can actually rest in that and trust Him to provide as well. So yeah, no stories of being disciplined with a guava stick, but
Yeah.
it was just that comparison of the before and after of seeing how much she struggled just in her life, and how, had she observed Sabbath, I really believe, even if there were other things that she didn't really want to follow, if she had that rest that God promises is a blessing, no matter, whether or not you kind of follow the other 9, for instance, there is a blessing pronounced on that day. And so it is a blessing to anybody, I believe, that takes that time to just pull back from society and
Yeah.
pull back from the need to provide for self. So
Ruth,
You, sorry.
over the last year, you've been writing on our Instagram channel a lot about the
yeah,
Sabbath. There's 2-3 posts a week, typically between Friday night and Sabbath itself. And the engagement has more than quadrupled as people begin to see the beauty of the Sabbath. And if you haven't checked it out, just go to Instagram at Adventist Church, and you'll be able to read it every week. And it seems like it's really resonating in the 21st century. This ancient, principle of rest on the seventh day, that people are really connecting with it. Do you find that to be the case as you read and write every week?
yeah, I think so. I started off, I wanted even my local church to understand the value of it, and to stop squabbling about the do's and don'ts, and gossiping about who's doing what and who's not doing what. And really for us to, I think the great thing about Instagram is, you pull up the phone, it's just you and the screen, and it doesn't even tell you how many people are liking the post anymore. It's just you and what it's saying to you, and what the Holy Spirit is saying to you, because we pray over these things. Um, and my thing was, we originally, when we were tasked with writing it, the team in charge said, well, Sam, you probably would have requested this as well, that we write posts about creation and how it relates to Sabbath. And so we started off with day one and how that actually kind of interlinks with Sabbath. And
I
the
remember
next week
that.
we had day two.
Mhm.
It's
Uh-huh.
really special for my growth and my understanding of like, oh my goodness, the Sabbath is intertwined with everything. And so I started
Everything
thinking,
we
oh,
talk about comes back to Sabbath.
it does, because
Yeah.
it's equal with this idea of our worth in God's eyes.
Yeah.
And then there was a point I was like, oh, surely you can't write it anymore. And God's like, said to me very clearly, the Sabbath is a non-exhaustive topic because it is just so central to everything you mean to me and everything that everybody else means to me. And I felt that really confirmed. And so every week I think, oh, what am I going to like write about this week? And sitting there on a Wednesday and already like kind of wanting the Sabbath to come about. Um, can I rest early, God? Um, and and every single week there's something that comes up and it's relevant to society. I think
Mhm.
it's not a horoscope. It's not like, you will experience this, or it's not like a flip calendar devotional, but I always ask God to allow me to write something that is going to speak to where people are at. And to let people know that we have such a beautiful, diverse community. People that are struggling with having absolutely nothing to do, and the idea of resting has been so narrowly defined that they think that it's just another boring day because either they don't work that much or they're throughout the week they've just got this pretty simple routine, or there's people that are just desperately exhausted and need the physical rest as well as the spiritual rest or reminder that God takes away that exhaustion, but also he encourages us to step away from the need to even walk in it in the first place. So it's been really special. It's been really special to see people's comments. I think I read one earlier on when we first got started, and the person said, "This is the best thing I've read all year," and I cried because I don't know you. Um, but if that's something that has really touched your heart and you can actually say that, then obviously there's some trauma, or there's just the Sabbath has not been shared in such a way in our churches or in our communities that really does resonate on a deep, personal, practical level. And that has been my experience in the past. It was attached so much to one of those 28 fundamental evangelistic services that they run through, and they hit the Sabbath, and then they hit the counterfeit of the Sabbath. And I just wanted to sit there doing a 28 series on the Sabbath because
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
lovely. It's a gift of love. It's not just like an end time test of faithfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talk, Ruth, speaking of Instagram, is you did one yourself on whether or not the Sabbath can bless those who do not keep it. Um, and I thought that was such a special thing that you wrote about how we can use Sabbath to bless those who maybe aren't intentionally keeping Sabbath, or how we can ease their burden. Can you walk through that a little bit with us, and
Yeah.
how you thought that through?
Yeah, so I understand that, first off, I understand that people have a different understanding of observing Sabbath and keeping it. And yes, first and foremost, God says it's a gift. I have taken you out of slavery, therefore you can act. I I guess I reshape the language of the Ten Commandments because I see them as promises, not just like hardline commandments. And so he said, therefore, I want you to experience this rest, and I want you to understand that you actually don't have to slave away or be so caught up in society and consumerism and these types of things, because that's not of my kingdom; it's of another kingdom. Um, and so I'm really careful to talk about this because obviously it's a page we have 112,000 followers, as well as other people coming in through hashtags and sharing on their stories. And so these communities grow bigger and bigger, and it's important to not necessarily assume a certain position on Sabbath and expect people to just agree with that. And so what I did was I said, a few years ago, I worked for Apple, And it was the first like retail store in the region, and so people would flock from all over the place. And I, at the time, was not a Christian. I'd been out of the church for about 3 or 4 years, and so I worked on Saturdays. And Saturdays were the most anxiety-inducing days. In fact, later on, I actually told work, I, it was a fib. I said to them that I was considering exploring my faith again because there were a couple of Adventists that worked there, and I was like, I'd like to take Saturdays off because I want to, it's a rest day in my faith, and I want to explore my faith again. I went to church a couple of times with my dad. He would travel down and he was visiting another church, and so I'd go with him. But mostly it was just so I could sleep in on a Saturday. But Saturday was the most stressful day in the shopping center, and especially in Apple. There were queues out the door, and a lot of angry, frustrated people who had spent their whole week working their 9 to 5 or 6 to 10 or shift, like overnight shift work, and they had kids that they were wrangling because they'd been at school all week, and then suddenly they had them with them. And society just has this laborious, stressful approach to all of these life responsibilities, right? And I don't think we escape that as Adventists
No.
just because of the title. But
Mhm.
for me, it would be really stressful as a worker. And I knew it was really stressful for the people coming in, but they needed their devices fixed, or they were caught up in this consumeristic mentality. And so I got to a point actually where I actually quit my job and just didn't want to be in that stressful environment. But so yeah, so I wrote this post and I explained the story of how I used to work in that space. And then when I became an Adventist, or just a Christian in general, the night that I had this rapid conversion was a Friday night. And so that Saturday, I was walking through the city because I had an engagement to do hair modeling for like a hairdresser salon place. And I felt so like caught up because I just felt so convicted to take that rest and to um, yeah, to not add to the burden of the bustling, stressful city atmosphere. And I just basically said, when we it's a conviction thing, definitely. But for me, my conviction is that when I go into a shop, um, and I go shopping for things, or I go out for a coffee at a busy restaurant or whatever it is. By coffee, I mean decaf in my circumstance. Um, but when I do those things on a Saturday, I add to this burden that is already present for people that are serving in those spaces. And they make that conscious choice to do that, not because they know about the Sabbath or not, but because there's a necessity in society to work over weekends, especially in hospitality and retail. And so it's like that child that's throwing, sees all the starfish washed up on the beach. That's the story, and this kid is walking along and jumping from rock to rock and place to place and throwing the starfish that he sees on the beach back into the water. And an old man comes along and says, what's the point? They're just going to wash up anyway. And he said, there's so many of them, you can't possibly put them all back. And he's like, yeah, but I'm making a difference to just one. And so for me, by doing all of the shopping that that is necessary, or just thinking of a different way to spend time in community with people on the Sabbath that doesn't involve a place where there's clanging plates with cutlery and somebody dropping a coffee and feeling stressed out and then embarrassed and all those things that naturally happen a lot on a Saturday in those places. I just want to be able to make the difference that I can by just producing that possible just momentary rest for that person. And I just thought, imagine if all of us that are Sabbath keepers were to just pull back from that, how much of a beautiful difference it would make. It seemed people, argue that, oh, they'll continue to work anyway. And I'm like, yeah, they probably will because they haven't heard the beauty of the Sabbath message yet, which is definitely our role. But it makes a difference, even if it's 5 minutes, that they can just take a breather.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think new generations, and I think we are part of these new generations, we're trying to figure out how to do less convincing and more inspiring. So in the past, the Sabbath was a way to convince. Let's convince everybody that the Sabbath is the correct day and therefore Sunday isn't. And there's plenty of evidence for that. You know, we have one of the graphics that we're preparing for Adventist.org has, here are the top 20 verses, the top verses for the Sabbath, and there are lots of verses. And the other graphic says, here are the top verses that from the Bible that point to worshiping on Sunday. And the list is empty because there aren't any. And it's a direct indictment on this idea of there's plenty of evidence for the Sabbath in the Bible. There is zero evidence for Sunday, but all but one or two of the Christian denominations, of the 2-point-something billion people, they still insist on Sunday. So for many generations, we tried to focus on convincing them that Sabbath was right and Sunday was wrong. And the reality is, in the 21st century, nobody wants to be convinced of anything. So what we are mostly interested in, it seems, is to inspire people to see the beauty of the Sabbath for what it is. What is the reason behind it? Why did God create it? Why is it a gift? And when Jesus says Sabbath was made for man, what does that mean exactly? Why do we need it? And there is a resurgence in the evangelical movements to rediscover the Sabbath. You know, there's a project called Digital Sabbath that is a secular project, calls everybody to just put the devices down on one day a week. You have influential writers in the U.S. evangelical churches that are pointing to the Sabbath. And sure, they are almost there. You're like, oh, look, you need a Sabbath. It could be Sunday, it could be Tuesday, it could be Wednesday, and so on. And if you're...
Or whatever day you're not busy.
You know, whatever day you're not busy, right. And I had some family members that, when I was a local church pastor in London, that pointed this out and said, well, Pastor Sam, listen, we take Tuesday. You know, we're not going to have the benefits if we do it on Tuesday. And the key, couple of things that struck me about this. The thing is, if you take Tuesday as your Sabbath, you will experience better family relationships. You will experience rest. It will be wonderful for your health, and you will get lots of benefits. At some point, I would like to invite you to rest on the day that God set, not the day that you set, because God is God and you are not. And if he set the seventh day, it's because he means it. He doesn't say things out of nowhere. And here's the second point about the Sabbath that I've been discovering recently. It's not just about the rest. It's about worship. And worship is very, very deep. It's not about you. Worship is that moment that you realize that you are not God, but God is God. And if God is God and you are not, then the Sabbath is a day that you recognize that the things that you have that are good are not from you to God, but are a gift from God to you. Let me go into this a little bit more. And it's C.S. Lewis who points this out beautifully. He says, if you have somebody who is very polite and nice and a wonderful person because of the upbringing they had and all the different opportunities they had, don't think for a moment that those things are a gift from this person to God. Don't think for a moment that their politeness and their ability to, let's take Ruth, for example. Incredible person. We've been working with Ruth for a year. Everybody loves Ruth in our team. And those things are not your gift to God. They are the result of all the experiences that God has given you, and therefore they are a gift from God to you. And they are a reminder. The Sabbath we worship and we say practice gratitude. We are absolutely grateful for every gift that we received in our lives. The Sabbath is not unique to the Bible. There was a very famous creation myth called the Numa Elish, which was a Mesopotamian, account of creation. And it also has the gods, Marduk and other gods, creating the world in 7 days. And on the seventh day, something should happen. But in Enuma Elish, in this, and there is a tablet in the British Museum with this, the original version of this. And on this day, humans would have to take food as sacrifice, build a temple, and take it to Marduk as a gift offering for this god called Marduk. And the account of the Bible is very different from every other account of creation and every other relationship with God. Because on Friday, it is God who creates the trees and provides them with food. It is God who brings food to them as a gift. It is God who sets this temple in time called the Sabbath. It is God who gives. Humans just respond to the love that God has. But God is the giver. God is the one that brings all the good things to them. And on this day, we worship because God said it should be this day, and precisely because we recognize that we are responding to his love for us. We're not trying to gain his love by doing the right thing. We are trying for God to, what we're trying is to respond to the love that he gave to us first. And that's the Sabbath. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it is. One of the things that we're working on, and that Ruth has sort of been tasked for doing is to, and before we get into this, we'll acknowledge that we don't even have a website name yet. So please don't go Googling this. We're going to put together a site just for the Sabbath. And it's going to be sort of not just for Adventists, but for but it's going to be for everyone. And I love the Sabbath. I mean, you guys know this. Sam and I've been in your ear for a long time. And Ruth, like you, I actually left the church for a while, but for some reason, the traditions of Sabbath kept with me. So every Friday we would clean our home. My roommates and I, we would clean our home and cook dinner together. Nothing surrounding it was Sabbath related. And certainly nothing during the meal was Sabbath related, and nothing that came after it should have been probably done on the Sabbath. But the ritual of Sabbath was still very important for us. And so Sabbath is ingrained in us, but we wanted to sort of be able to talk to people who maybe didn't know what we loved about the Sabbath, or we understood about the Sabbath, or how we came to, like Sam, you said we wanted to inspire people to love the Sabbath as much as we are and to understand this gift that God has given us. And so Ruth, you've been sort of tasked with writing this for us. And I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about that process that you went through, or that you are currently going through, sort of, and how we're deciding what we want to talk about and how we want to talk about it for people, like he said, to be inspired by that blessing that we want them to participate in as well.
Yeah, so it's really exciting. I think I didn't realize that this was already a plan. We noticed a lot of people writing in the comments of the Happy Sabbath posts on Instagram that this should be a devotional. Have you ever thought of writing a book? And the thought of, like, for me to write a book, I'm like, I'd love to. I've never done that before. But then the idea of the website was brought to our attention, and I thought, most people, when they find content on the Sabbath, whether we like to admit it or not, as Adventists, we love to proof text. And like the text they do really thread together and make complete sense in the biblical narrative when we use them. Like Sam was mentioning, the 20 texts that point towards the Sabbath being on the seventh day and the practice of it. But I really wanted to, I guess I'd been burnt by the experience when I was younger of being in a local church community that really either just didn't, half of them didn't really care about Sabbath observance that much. It was a 3-hour service on a Saturday, and then you just stayed hush-hush about what everybody else was doing with the day and tried not to, judge everybody else's Sabbath practices. Or there were the people that were pointing towards it as being, like, as I said earlier, this day that you show your loyalty to God, and in the end times it's become really serious, and if you don't, then it's just this like negative language around it, which God never framed the Sabbath in. He never spoke about, the mark of the beast or anything like that. On day 7 of creation, it was like, come and rest with me, come and spend time with me, come and enjoy the beauty of nature and the beauty of everything I've given you, and just just sit in it and just marinate in it. And so for me, I'm kind of healing from that mentality of years past, and also seeing it in churches still today. And so the gift of being able to write, thank you so much, Sam, and those as well involved in being able to write these. But now coming to this website, I don't want it to just be like a place where you go, oh, an article that proves it. Here I go, I'll send it to somebody. I want whoever comes across that page, whether they be a seasoned Adventist or whether they be, Protestant or Catholic, or exploring the idea of a digital Sabbath, as Sam mentioned, or outside of faith altogether, whatever it is, to be able to read it and see that God is saying to them, "You are so worthy of my love and time, uninterrupted." And so the website is going to be quite upfront about the idea that there's a lot of trauma, a lot of brokenness that has resulted out of individuals and communities and organizations. And I mean, even, the evangelicals and people outside of the Adventist faith in Christianity, they're quite burnt at the idea of Sabbath because they see this, how it's attached to legalism as experienced in Jesus's time by the Jewish nation, and so they attach that to another religion altogether, because the idea of bridging that and making sense of that is not easy to do. And so we're here as Adventists to bridge that gap and to say that, once again, Sabbath is beautiful and it's a gift. And so this website is kind of taking people on a journey for that. We're exploring the SEO, which is essentially, for people that don't understand, and I'm going to butcher this. Basically, when people search questions or they're exploring ideas, we generally go to Google. And so Google allows us to know what are the things that people are searching for, and how to rank our website essentially as number one to those questions. But I find that a lot of people aren't searching questions about which day is the Sabbath on out of wanting to prove a certain point or anything, but they're actually curious, and they're hopeful to find inspiring truth, and probably don't want to be slapped in the face by a very black and white answer, because there's a lot of nuance as we experience this, and we all come from broken backgrounds, and people being quite forward about things can further that trauma trigger of whatever legalistic background we've had, legalism inside and outside the church. And so it's a little journey, it's a walkthrough. It's this idea of, well, what is the Sabbath? What does it mean to rest? Why is this rest different, as Sam said, from just resting on a Tuesday?
Right.
There is God. Yeah, sorry, Jennifer.
No, I was gonna say, I was gonna talk to ask Sam. We've talked about on this program before, and I think both you and Ruth have talked about this pretty eloquently, that Sabbath is a freedom and a blessing. But so many times when we talk about Sabbath as a Christian church, we frame it negatively, like you can't do this on Sabbath, you can't do that on Sabbath. And Ruth, I love the way that even when you're talking about why you choose not to do certain things on the Sabbath, you talk about it being a freedom, like a freedom from that burden of having to do something. And so I feel like we're trying to reframe the conversation, for not from a list of things you can and can't do. Like you can, we all joke, you can wade up to your ankles, but not to your knees. You can kick the ball, but you can't have it kick back to you, or some. And so as we're growing up, I don't know, I made that one smart, but as we grow up, we have unfortunately framed these in a negative, that Sabbath is a full list of things you can't do, instead of, even for little children, look, this is the day you get to spend with your parents because they're free from work. This is the day that you get to spend with your families because we're free from the burden of the world. And so I'd love to hear from both of you about how much this is needed now, this idea of freedom versus restriction, when it comes to this, and how that can be in itself inspiring and a blessing.
Yeah, I
I'm
was
going
just
to
going to
lean
say,
in. Go
oh,
ahead,
sorry.
Ruth, and then
Just in regards
yeah.
to like the website, it's
Yeah.
actually to enable people to rewire all of the languages around that idea of freedom and
Yeah.
liberty. And even to the point where you might have noticed on the Instagram, we're actually asking random people all over the world just to give us the Sabbath is,
Hmm.
finish the sentence. We're asking people from the GC, asking people from Australia, from England, we've got friends in Zimbabwe that have asked. Like I've just fielded out the question and asked people as well within our team to ask their friends, and to hear Adventists be able to articulate the liberty around that, and know that that idea of liberty is actually the main premise of this. And God frames that in the Ten Commandments. He says, I brought you out of slavery. Here it is. Here's a day off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to lean into this idea of legalism that Ruth brought out, because it's a big misunderstanding that people have that Sabbath is a legalistic thing. Now, of course, it's there in the law, and God did not give the law as a joke. It's not just your general guidelines. It's the law. It's important. It matters, and you have the commandments. And it's interesting that Christianity has no problem with any of the other commandments. Everybody's quite happy for the other 9.
Hmm.
Honor your father and mother so that your days are prolonged on the earth. Yes. Tick. That's great. Don't lie. Yes. No adultery. Fine with it. You shall not take the name of God in vain. Absolutely agree. You should keep the Sabbath. No, that's just the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's
I've heard
totally
so many people say that recently too.
it's totally inconsistent. You
Yeah.
cannot pick 9 and then choose one that is not convenient to you and say that belongs to the Old Testament. And this comes from this idea that the Old Testament, God saved through the law. And the New Testament with Jesus, God saves through grace. And this small mistake in biblical interpretation will lead you down a path that you will end up with the kingdom of heaven being anything but the kingdom of heaven. Because it's never been through the law. It has always been through grace. In the Garden of Eden, it was grace. In the flood, it was grace. With Abraham, it was grace. With Isaac, grace. Jacob, grace. With Joseph, grace. With David, grace. And with Moses in the law, it's grace. And this comes from a misunderstanding of how the commandments start. And it's okay, people make mistakes, but this one has insane consequences. The first commandment does not start with, thou shalt have no other gods before me. That's not how the commandment starts. The commandment starts there in Exodus chapter 20. It starts with, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Ruth was beginning to allude to this. The 10 commandments are not the way in which you're going to appease God so that he can forgive you. It's never been like this. The law is not capable of bringing you salvation. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. It's always been grace. Grace is the first sentence of the law because God brings them out of slavery. Now that you are free, then let me help you understand what free people do. They only worship gods that exist. They don't create images of God because they cannot define who I am. They respect my name. They stop one day a week on the 7th day to remember that they're not machines and that their value doesn't come from how many bricks they produce. Remember Pharaoh in Egypt? You will produce more bricks, less bricks. Your value was how many bricks you produced. Now God frees you from that slavery and says, in order for you to remember that you're free, you're going to keep the Sabbath. You will honor your parents. You will not lie. You will not murder. And all the other of the commandments. It's a mark of freedom because they did not know how to live a life of freedom. It's always been grace. If it was the law, the legalistic vision that people say that in the Old Testament you were saved if you kept the law, then the story would have gone very differently, wouldn't it? God would have come to them in Egypt and said, hey, slaves, here's my law. You've got 6 months. I'm going to check your performance at the end of 6 months. And if you can at least come to a satisfactory result, I will bring you out of Egypt. God doesn't do that. because it's always been grace. God does not require our actions for him to exercise grace. Grace is grace. Now, once you are saved, once you are free, then you need to live up to that calling. And grace isn't cheap. He restores us, he frees us, and we need to step up to that calling. And there's a sentence, and I don't know where I got this from, but it's a really powerful sentence. Salvation is free, but it will cost you everything. It's free, it's yours. But in order for you to live out salvation and freedom, it will cost you. You need to make decisions. I want to do this, but only slaves do that. It's a bit like smoking and drinking, you know? It begins like a mark of freedom, especially when you're a teenager. You know, it's like, I can drink now, you know, I can smoke now. Great. And the thing that you thought brought you freedom, soon you become a slave to. And it's always like this. And so you have to make some choices that are very difficult to make for you to exercise that freedom. But it's always being grace. So the law is important. Is it important? Yes, it's very important. It points out the moments that you really need Jesus for. There is no commandment that can be followed without God giving you the power to do it. He's the one that frees you. He's the one that, and the Sabbath is one of those. It's not easy to keep the Sabbath. You need to start planning on Sunday. You know, you need to start thinking of the entire week, how your family will rest properly. But it's like the climax of the week, as Ruth was pointing out. You know, can I have it earlier? You know, that's the idea. But it takes work. It takes intentionality during the week, so that all your shopping is done, all your studying done, your work, everything. On Friday, your work is done, even when it isn't. Right. And we've recently onboarded some people into our teams. I'll tell you the story because I think it's just so cool. We had this programmer that we were going to bring for Heroes, game developer. He's not an Adventist. And game development is a ruthless profession. In crunch time, before a game is released, people work 24 hours a day. It's insane. They move to the office. And all game developers knows this. They don't get paid extra. It's just what happens because the game needs to be shipped and they need to deliver. So he's asking me about what's the culture, you know, of the company, what's the culture of the project in terms of crunch time. And I said, well, it's very simple. From Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, don't touch the code. And it's like, what do you mean? I go, don't touch it. Because we are Seventh-day Adventists, and we need to tell you about this. In Egypt, and I told him the whole thing I just told you, about the bricks, about the value. So Sabbath, you remember that your value to this team and to God is not the quality or the performance of your code. Your value goes way beyond that. And he's got his wide eyes looking at me like, what? So this is on, I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday. The next day, we get another application from one of his friends from a top company who is applying for the job. Why? Because of the Sabbath in large part. It's like, we never heard of this. This is amazing. I need to be part of this team. And we hired his friend too, part-time, because we can't afford him full-time. So it's a beautiful, it's an inspiring thing when you have people that never heard of this for the first time and they go, I need that in my life. I would like to have this. Is it even possible to have this? And I think we're sitting on a gold mine. I think that if Seventh-day Adventists understood how incredible the Sabbath is, we will be telling everybody we know and their cousin that they should take the Sabbath seriously because it's such a beautiful thing.
I love the way that you put this because I guess maybe I had never thought about it in this way, the Ten Commandments, because it just reminds me, the Sabbath usually reminds me, but the way that you just talked about the commandments, about how kind God is to us, that Ruth, you know, you talked about them as promises or as blessings, because each of the 10 commandments goes into something that can enslave us a little bit. If you are hooked on lying, if you are caught in adultery, certainly if you murder someone, or if you steal, or even covetousness or jealousy of someone, you want something that someone else has. There's such enslavement. I mean, when you are caught, you know, we say you're caught in a lie, you're slave to this false narrative, or you're, you know, obviously with adultery is quite the thing. I mean, like quite this, it catches you and you can't get out of it. And so the Sabbath is is such a freedom. And I think about this sometimes when I'm in Sabbath, about the kindness of God for providing it. And sometimes I think we forget this when we work for the church, because there are times when we're asked to sort of, I don't want to say work on Sabbath, but we're asked to participate
Get
in
off.
ministry on Sabbath, especially when we're traveling and we have to go to different churches or through different ministries. And so I sometimes forget, and then there are times when we've had such a busy, stressful, insane week, and you sit on the Sabbath, and just for a little bit, you're so grateful for the kindness of God for providing this. And I genuinely don't know how people survive without it anymore. I don't know how you go through life. And Ruth, you talked about your mom's struggle about providing, trying to struggle to have that worth provided to her, or
Yeah.
working. I don't know how people do it without that day. I don't know that I could do it without Sabbath. Like, I don't know if I could keep up with my job. And I certainly notice, and I don't know if you two notice, on the times when you probably don't keep it in the way that you should, you recognize that in the next week.
Yeah, immediately.
And
By
because,
Tuesday, you know.
yeah,
Yeah. I
because, and it's not God punishing us, it's because we didn't take that time that He
Yeah.
invited us to. I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that God punishes me on Tuesday for not keeping His Sabbath.
Look, if you
That's not
spend
what I'm
all night
saying.
watching Netflix, you're going to be tired the next day, and God has
Right.
very little to do with it.
was just going to say, Jennifer, you mentioned, this idea of, like you mentioned my mum, and
Yeah.
a few people that know me, and I think you guys do too, know that my mum passed away about 1.5 years, nearly 2 years ago now. She had ovarian cancer, and their understanding, I guess doctors' understanding and specialists' understanding, is that ovarian cancer, unless it's genetically passed down, is caused very much by lifestyle, but more so to do with stress and exhaustion. And I remember when I first came back to Australia, I'd become a Christian when I was living in England, and I came back to Australia, and I had started living again with my mum for a short amount of time. And one of our close friends, he was my principal growing up, and he was kind of like a person that she saw in the Adventist church that was very beautiful, and she trusted him. And he said to her, those that honor God, God honors. And he says, every single time I see you flying above the church on a Saturday, I pray that one day you'll land, and then you'll come join us, or at least just come join God, because he said, Judith, you need the rest. And I see her whole life was spent. I imagine that if she'd taken every Saturday off, people say that obviously days of rest extend your life, because it reinvigorates us. And imagine if we were to take off every single Saturday, and actually how long that would extend not just our lifespan, but the quality of life. And I felt really convicted that for my mum, especially because Saturdays was such a stressful day in her business. Before that, she was a real estate agent and doing open houses and dealing with difficult people. She never got to enjoy that family fellowship with us as a family. And it really fractured our family in a lot of ways. My brother's, he has a lot of question about faith and that experience because of the fracture of our family. And I have no doubt that my mum's illness and just the stress and burden on her body was caused by the fact that she didn't surrender, and that she didn't rest into that beautiful time, and didn't spend that quality time with God and people that could fellowship and lift her up and remind her that day, fellowshipping with one another and seeing one another in church or in faith community, and be like, hey, I just wanted to remind you that God actually loves you, and that I do too. That hearing those words of affirmation and seeing that in community, if we can do that well as churches, then I think it's just such an extended blessing. It's a life or death thing, honestly. That's what I've been convicted of. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah, for me, yeah.
No, it's such a beautiful thing. And I want to, I know we need to wrap up here in a minute or so. So I promised, I told you guys before I was going to ask you this, um, about our favorite ways to spend Sabbath. Like, what is what you enjoy to do? What is, like, if you could have your perfect Sabbath, what that would that be? Right now we're in the COVID. I mean, Ruth, not so much for you in Australia. You have said that you're pretty much back to normal, but here, but here in the US, we're still under some pretty strict restrictions. And one of my favorite things to do on Sabbath is we have family dinner every Sabbath. Um, my parents and our friends, and it is a catastrophe and chaotic, but it is such a beautiful reminder of the blessing of Sabbath, that God provides us this time with each other, and through, the kids running around and everybody outside and talking and, sharing and laughing, that you see this beauty that God has given us and the blessings. And that's my favorite thing to do on Sabbath. Yeah, I also like to go out hiking and that sort of thing. But being together with friends and family it's something I've missed a lot within these past year. We were able to do it on a smaller scale, but it's something I've really, really longed for. But I would love to hear from you and Sam. I'm going to start with Sam because Ruth, when you're finished, I would love for you to pray for us. Um, so Sam, how do you feel the most blessed on Sabbath? Like, what is your favorite Sabbath?
I think it has to involve food because eating is good, and it has to involve friends and family. And I think the icing on the cake, that is, if you can, together with friends and family, provide some tangible help to someone else that needs it,
Mm.
and connect at that human level with somebody that needs it. Now, in the West, it's very hard to find people that genuinely need it and that they need it. That was our experience in London. And we often were, as friends, trying to find projects to take part in and to do it on the Sabbath. Not the whole Sabbath, just a couple of hours. But to have that experience was great. So that's my perfect Sabbath. And before Ruth shares, because I know she will pray, and I have one more thought about the whole Sabbath.
Yes,
So
please.
if I
Sorry.
may. We talked about how inspiring and wonderful it is, but I'm going to point out the reality. Sabbath keepers are very annoying people, right? We need to
Just
acknowledge
personally,
this.
just
We
personally, we're
we
super annoying.
we are very annoying because to the rest of the world, you go to university, and it's like, okay, the exam, the test is Friday night, and then the Adventist says, nope, not going to do it. But if you don't do this, you're not going to graduate. So be it. I'm not going to do it. It's like really annoying people. They are inflexible. But can you come just for this afternoon, in retail? Nope, cannot do it. But if you don't do it, this shop is going to close and you're going to be jobless. Then I'm going to be jobless, but I'm not coming. And so this is, you cannot enslave a Sabbath keeper. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot enslave a Sabbath keeper. It's either freedom or death to the Sabbath keeper. And Jews have been doing this for a while. To Jews especially, the Orthodox Jews. It's either freedom or death. Because you're and it all comes down to this one day. So you're going to lose your job. I'm not defined by money. You're not going to graduate. I'm not defined by my diplomas.
Mm.
You're not, and the refusal to accept any carrot or stick in order to change your behavior on this one day. It's where the line is drawn. And I think the 10 Commandments are the drawing of lines that these are the things that I will not compromise on. I will not lie. I will not commit adultery. It doesn't matter what happens. I will not. And so this, I believe, especially to do with the Sabbath, there is a scatological dimension to this. And scatological means it's about the end of time. And the Bible talks about persecution. The Bible talks about at the end of time, there will be a group of people that because of their faithfulness to 10 Commandments will be persecuted. And I think it comes from this fundamentalist approach to this that we're describing. Because on the one hand, yes, it is beautiful. On the other hand, it's inflexible. You draw the line. This is it. I will not compromise on this because
Mm.
this matters. And I think that it's very difficult for people to accept it. Yes, it's a beautiful thing, but can you not just make one exception? Can't you talk to your pastor? Can you just ask your church for just one exception on this? It's fine.
For a
No, it's
letter.
not. It's not. It's uncompromising, and there is freedom in that, in those things that are not, that you cannot compromise on. So yes, we experience the beauty of the Sabbath every week, almost every week. Some Sabbaths are not as good as others, but we need to remember that at times there will be persecution and times will be difficult precisely because of the Sabbath. But God will honor those that are faithful. That I believe, and I've seen it many times over.
Yeah. I have an example of that just quickly. Just before we got started, we were talking about what classifies as like helping an ox out of a ditch, which is like the reference,
Yeah.
Jesus says, absolutely, on Sabbath, if there's somebody struggling, we go to work and helping them. And my mum used to fly a plane in on a Saturday morning and sometimes not have somebody to help her dock the plane. So, she would land on the water, it's a float plane, and then have to kind of taxi through, and there should be somebody at the end there. Or she would ask me to take the trailer in and things like that. And I just felt convicted to not do it. I was like, well, if you're such a well-organized, self-sufficient person who doesn't need Sabbath, it's really... I got to the point where I was a bit cheeky about it, but she ended up respecting me for it. Because at the end of the day, and at the end of her life, she saw how I really was unwavering in this because I really did get my worth from God. And I think that's really important, Sam. You mentioned that we set an example. It's not just because we're faithful to God and that is all. Our faithfulness to God has, by extension, by natural extension, this blessing upon other people, which is why observing the Sabbath in a way that, thou shalt not work, neither anybody that lives in your house or the stranger within your gate. Well, when you walk into community, it's a secular society, that you're extending your gate, at least in my mind,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
But that kind of extends to that question you asked, Jennifer, of what is the favorite part of Sabbath? And I found sometimes people were trying to be quite structured in how we did Sabbath. So we have the morning service and Sabbath school, and absolutely what a blessing to learn together and to share what we've learned throughout the week. I think of the Sabbath school as the manna, which we pick up throughout the week, and then we share. And we're not feeding on Sabbath because we've already fed throughout the week, right?
Nice.
But this
Nice.
idea of being able to
Yeah.
share what we've talked about, and fellowship, which we get this need met of community and relationship. And then my favorite Sabbaths, so our church has the option to meet in the big building, but what happened was that they split when we weren't able to meet at all. They split us into small groups on Zoom based on the area and the region that we lived in, and then we were starting to meet in personal groups of 10 to 20 people. And so the group that I've joined and moved back to my local, like my hometown, and my dad's now leading out a group at a friend's house, and there's about 15 to 20 of us that meet each week. And I come with no agenda. I just come to fellowship. I bring a salad or a plate of food, and I ask God as I'm driving, like, allow me to learn from somebody and for somebody to learn from me. And every single week that we've been, I've had these conversations with parents that are showing up that aren't a part of the Adventist church, but are curious, but they have stuff going on that isn't going to be answered in a sermon about the three angels message. It's going to be answered in a person-to-person chat over lunch about how to help navigate the teenage years of their daughter and the frustrations that she has, and then last week I brought leftovers to a woman that normally comes to our church. She's just moved to the area and she had a viral infection and was quite sick, but she needed that fellowship. And so my favorite Sabbaths are spent definitely having that fellowship in the morning, but asking God, what way can I faithfully extend this Sabbath to others, and leaving my Sabbath afternoon free. And then I cap it off with a walk along the beach where last week I just turned to the waves and I sobbed because I was just like happy sobbing. Is that a thing? I
Yeah.
was just so blown away by God's faithfulness to me, even in that day alone. I'm getting teary. um, but also in my life, in the way that He's been leading, because I've been leaning into this Sabbath practice more
Mhm.
in the last year, especially since writing these Instagram posts, Sam. It's been the food that I needed to shift my perspective of my worth and my value. And so natural extension is that it becomes a blessing to others just as much as it's a blessing to me as well. Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's very beautiful. So I can't think that we want to add anything more to that because this has been such an inspiring talk. So if you could pray for us to close us out, I think that would be a big blessing.
Absolutely. Lord, we thank you so much for creating us, for giving us life, and then saying, "Hey, this is the best way to live it." Lord, we faithfully turn towards you, and we want to live life the way that you intended, Lord. Whoever is listening to this, whether it's today or tonight, um, or further along in the future, Lord, we thank you so much for their attention. And Lord, I just ask that you bless their lives, Lord, and that they lean this coming Sabbath, the one that is upcoming, or the one if they're watching now and it's on a Sabbath, that they immediately just flop into your arms and recognize that you just love them so much, Lord. We pray that this might be a blessing not just to individuals, but to conversations in families and in communities, Lord. And that we all walk away with a sense of knowing that we are just so valuable in your eyes. You gave us your son's life. And he seemed to think that the Sabbath was pretty important, Lord. So we've decided to see it that way as well. We pray in your name. Amen.
No.
Amen.
Thank you, Ruth, for joining us today and for your insight and for sharing your love of the Sabbath with us. And Sam, thank you as always. If you have watched this, we hope we've inspired you to take Sabbath and just try this week. Just this week, try Sabbath and see how God blesses you, and then try next week. Usually, I ask you to leave your prayer request in the comments, and please do that as well. We have people praying for you 24/7. But also, leave us a comment about what you like to do on Sabbath and why you love the Sabbath and how God has been kind to you this week. We'll see you next week. God bless.